You ordered rocks? He asked, gesturing towards the enormous bags piled on the truck bed. A lot of rocks. Pebbles, actually, I corrected him. Glow-in-the-dark pebbles. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head and muttered something about crazy suburbanites. Let's be honest, my front lawn wasn't going to win any Yard of the Month awards. It wasn't a disaster zone by any means, but it definitely wasn't the picture-perfect golf course green expanse that seemed to be the standard in Oak Bay Estates. There were a few brown patches, casualties of the recent dry spell. A scattering of dandelions added a splash of, unwanted apparently, yellow. And there was the occasional bare spot where Buster, my golden retriever, liked to dig for buried treasures, mostly his own tennis balls. My lawn wasn't exactly winning any awards. It had a few brown patches, some dandelions, and the occasional bare spot where the dog liked to dig. But it was my lawn, and I was perfectly happy with it, I thought, surveying my slightly less than perfect patch of green. I'd mow it regularly, I'd water it when I could, and I generally tried to keep it presentable. But I wasn't obsessed. I didn't believe in pouring chemicals and gallons of water onto my lawn just to achieve some artificial standard of suburban perfection. In Oak Bay Estates, however, perfectly happy was a direct violation of HOA policy. I just didn't realize how soon that policy would come crashing down on my unsuspecting, slightly brown-patched lawn. The doorbell rang. A sharp, insistent sound that instantly put me on edge. I knew, even before I opened the door, that it wasn't going to be a friendly visit. And I was right. Standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, was Marjorie Finkelstein. The name conjured images of perfectly manicured hedges, surgically precise flower beds, and a complete absence of anything remotely resembling spontaneity. She was the self-appointed queen of curb appeal, the empress of exterior aesthetics, and the sworn enemy of anyone who dared to let their grass grow a millimeter too long. Her smile was tight, her eyes were narrowed, and her perfectly coiffed blonde hair looked like it could withstand a hurricane. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice dripping with a mixture of disapproval and condescension, "I'm afraid we have a problem with your lawn." She said lawn as if it were a synonym for crime scene. "A problem?" I asked, feigning innocence. "What seems to be the issue?" "The issue, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice rising slightly, "is that your lawn lacks vibrancy. It's dull. It's brown. It simply does not meet the standards of Oak Bay Estates." She gestured towards my lawn with a perfectly manicured hand, as if pointing out a particularly offensive stain. "It's bringing down the entire neighborhood's aesthetic." This, apparently referring to the identical houses, painted in slightly differing shades of beige. Marjorie's complaint about my lawn wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the latest salvo in the Oak Bay Estates HOA's ongoing war against anything that deviated from their narrow definition of suburban perfection. This was the same HOA that had once tried to ban backyard trampolines, claiming they were eyesores and attracted undesirable elements. Apparently, children having fun were considered undesirable. They had strict rules about mailbox colors, beige of course, fence heights, no higher than 4 feet, to ensure maximum visibility for neighborhood surveillance, and even the types of flowers you were allowed to plant, nothing too colorful or exotic. They sent out monthly newsletters filled with passive-aggressive reminders about proper lawn care, appropriate holiday decorations, and the importance of maintaining a harmonious community aesthetic. They had committees dedicated to landscape compliance, architectural review, and neighborhood beautification, which in reality meant enforcing conformity and crushing any hint of individuality. My internal reaction to all of this was a mixture of annoyance, frustration, and a growing sense of disbelief. Were these people serious? Did they really have nothing better to do than obsess over the color of my mailbox and the height of my grass? I thought. I tried to reason with Marjorie. I explained that it had been a particularly dry summer, that I was following local water conservation guidelines, and that, frankly, I didn't particularly care about having a perfectly green lawn. But my arguments fell on deaf ears. Marjorie Finkelstein was not interested in reason, in logic, or in the concept of individual choice. She was interested in rules, in regulations, and in enforcing her narrow vision of suburban perfection upon everyone within her reach. A few days later, the official HOA notice arrived, a crisp white envelope containing a sternly worded letter and a hefty fine. My lawn, it declared, was in flagrant violation of the community's landscaping guidelines. I had 30 days to remediate the situation, that is, make my lawn look exactly like everyone else's, or face escalating penalties, including the possibility of legal action. Marjorie had added a personal, handwritten post-it note. "Rules are rules. You have 30 days to fix it, or we'll escalate the fines." I crumpled the letter in my fist, my initial reaction one of pure, unadulterated rage. I considered complying. I could spend a fortune on sod, chemicals, and endless watering just to appease Marjorie and her beige brigade. I could conform, submit, and become another drone in the HOA's hive mind. But then, something shifted. A spark of rebellion ignited within me. I was tired of the rules, tired of the restrictions, tired of the constant pressure to conform. I looked out at my slightly less than perfect lawn, and a new idea began to take shape. A crazy idea, a brilliant idea, an idea that would not only solve my lawn problem but also drive Marjorie Finkelstein absolutely insane. If Marjorie wanted a vibrant lawn, I'd give her a vibrant lawn. I'd give her a lawn so vibrant, so unexpected, so utterly un-Marjorie-like that it would make her perfectly coiffed hair stand on end, I thought, a mischievous grin spreading across my face. Glow-in-the-dark Pebbles. It was the perfect solution. It was landscaping, technically. It wasn't grass, so it couldn't violate the grass height or grass color rules. And it was, without a doubt, the most gloriously inappropriate response to Marjorie's demand for vibrancy that I could possibly imagine. "Marjorie Finkelstein, you want a war on grass? You've got one. Prepare to be illuminated," I declared internally, already picturing Marjorie's horrified reaction to my glowing, otherworldly creation. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. With the seed of my glow-in-the-dark revenge firmly planted, I turned to the internet, the source of all great and terrible ideas. I needed to find a way to make my lawn vibrant, but in a way that would completely bypass the HOA's ridiculous restrictions on grass. My initial searches were, admittedly, a bit all over the place. I looked at artificial turf, drought-resistant ground cover, and even considered painting my lawn green, a fleeting thought, quickly dismissed as too normal. But then I stumbled upon something unexpected, something magical, something luminescent. Glow-in-the-dark Pebbles. My browser history went from drought-tolerant grass seed to glow-in-the-dark rocks wholesale in record time, I chuckled as I delved deeper into this strange and wonderful world. These weren't your average glow-in-the-dark toys. These were specially treated stones, designed for landscaping that absorbed sunlight during the day and emitted a soft, ethereal glow at night. They came in various colors, blue, green, aqua, and were, according to the product descriptions, completely safe for the environment and required absolutely no maintenance. I read about their properties, the intensity of the glow, the duration of the luminescence, the best methods for installation. I learned that they were made from a special type of resin infused with phosphorescent pigments. I learned that they were weather-resistant, durable, and could last for years. And, most importantly, I learned that they were perfectly legal. There were no local ordinances, no state regulations, and certainly no HOA bylaws that specifically prohibited the use of glow-in-the-dark pebbles in landscaping. It was a loophole big enough to drive a truckload of glowing rocks through. Finding a supplier for glow-in-the-dark pebbles wasn't difficult. There were dozens of online retailers offering them in various sizes, colors, and quantities. The challenge was figuring out how much I needed. I wanted to cover my entire front yard to create a truly spectacular, otherworldly glow. I did some rough calculations, pacing around my lawn, measuring its dimensions, and muttering to myself about square footage and pebble density. I finally settled on a number that seemed sufficient. A number that also made my credit card company send me a fraud alert. I placed the order, choosing a mix of blue and green pebbles for a mystical forest effect. The website promised delivery within a week. The anticipation was almost unbearable. The delivery day arrived, and it was a sight to behold. A massive flatbed truck, groaning under the weight of its cargo, pulled up in front of my house. The driver, a burly man with a look of utter bewilderment on his face, emerged from the cab. "You ordered rocks?" he asked, gesturing towards the enormous bags piled on the truck bed. "A lot of rocks." "Pebbles, actually," I corrected him. "Glow-in-the-dark pebbles." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head and muttered something about crazy suburbanites. Unloading the pebbles was a Herculean task. The bags were heavy, awkward, and surprisingly numerous. I enlisted the help of a few, bribed with pizza and beer, friends, and we spent the entire afternoon hauling the glowing stones into my backyard, creating a mountain of luminescent potential. The neighbors, of course, were watching. They'd gather on their lawns, whispering to each other, pointing and staring. Mrs. Higgins, armed with her trusty binoculars, maintained a constant vigil from her window. Even Marjorie Finkelstein, I noticed, seemed to be taking an unusual interest in my activities, her face a mask of suspicion and disapproval. It was all going according to plan. Before I could unleash the glow, I had to deal with the existing, unvibrant grass. This meant removing every last blade, every weed, every stubborn root from my entire front yard. It was a daunting task, a back-breaking, sweat-inducing endeavor that tested the limits of my physical endurance and my sanity. I rented a sod cutter, a monstrous machine that looked like a cross between a lawnmower and a rototiller. It roared like a jet engine and vibrated with terrifying force, tearing up the grass in long, satisfying strips. The work was arduous, the sun was beating down, and my muscles screamed in protest. But I persevered, fueled by a potent mixture of spite and determination. The neighbors, as always, were watching. They'd peek through their curtains, stand on their porches, and even venture out onto their lawns, pretending to water their flowers while secretly observing my increasingly bizarre landscaping project. I could feel their eyes on me, their whispers, their unspoken questions. Marjorie Finkelstein, of course, was the most attentive observer. She'd stand at the edge of her property, her arms crossed, her lips pursed, her expression a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. She'd occasionally make snide comments, loud enough for me to hear, about destroying perfectly good grass and creating an eyesore. I ignored her. I focused on the task at hand, on the vision of my glowing lawn, on the sweet, sweet taste of revenge that was soon to be mine. The grass removal was a necessary sacrifice, a prelude to the glorious, luminescent transformation that was about to take place. With the grass gone, my front yard was a blank canvas, a barren expanse of dirt waiting to be transformed. It was time to unleash the glow. The installation of the Pebbles was a surprisingly meticulous process. I wanted to create a natural, organic look, avoiding any straight lines or obvious patterns. I spread the pebbles by hand, scattering them across the yard, mixing the blue and green colors to create a subtle, shimmering effect. It was slow, painstaking work, but I found it strangely therapeutic. As I worked, I imagined Marjorie's reaction, picturing her face contorted in outrage, her perfectly ordered world shattered by my glowing rebellion. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. I finished the last section, stepped back, and waited. And then it happened. As darkness fell, the pebbles began to glow. Slowly at first, a faint, ethereal shimmer, then gradually increasing in intensity, transforming my yard into a magical, otherworldly landscape. The blue and green stones emitted a soft, otherworldly light, creating a mesmerizing, almost hypnotic effect. It was breathtaking. It was absurd. It was perfect. And it was all completely 100% HOA loophole compliant, I thought, gazing at my creation with a mixture of pride and amusement. It was like something out of a science fiction movie, a glowing alien landscape, a beacon of luminous defiance in the heart of suburbia. I'd taken Marjorie Finkelstein's demand for vibrancy and turned it into a reality that was far beyond anything she could have ever imagined, and I knew with absolute certainty that she was going to hate it. The morning after the great glow-up, I awoke to the sound of shrieking. Not the pleasant chirping of birds kind of shrieking, but the shrill, ear-piercing, Karen in distress kind of shrieking. I knew instantly that Marjorie Finkelstein had discovered my luminescent masterpiece. I peered out my window, and there she was, standing on the edge of my glowing lawn, her face a mask of utter horror and disbelief. She looked like she'd just stumbled upon an alien landing site, or perhaps a portal to another dimension. Her perfectly coiffed hair was slightly disheveled, her pastel cardigan was askew, and her mouth was moving, but no coherent words were coming out. I grabbed a cup of coffee, strolled outside, and feigned surprise. "Good morning, Marjorie," I said, my voice dripping with innocent politeness. "Is something wrong?" "Wrong?" she finally managed to sputter, her voice trembling with rage. "Wrong? Mr. Thompson, what have you done? This is unacceptable. You've turned your lawn into a radioactive wasteland." She pointed a trembling finger at the glowing pebbles, as if they were emitting deadly gamma rays. "It's a decorative rock garden, Marjorie," I corrected her gently. "It's very zen, very calming. And as you can see, it's quite vibrant." I emphasized the word vibrant, knowing how much it would irk her. "It glows!" she shrieked, her voice reaching a new, even more impressive pitch. "Lawns are not supposed to glow. It's unnatural. It's obscene." "Actually, Marjorie," I said, taking a leisurely sip of my coffee, "there's no rule against glowing lawns. There was a rule about lawns lacking vibrancy, but I believe I've addressed that concern quite thoroughly." I gestured towards the glowing expanse, a picture of serene satisfaction. Just insufficiently vibrant ones, as I recall. Watching Marjorie's face contort with rage and disbelief was more satisfying than any perfectly green lawn could ever be, I thought, struggling to suppress a laugh. Her eyes were bulging, her fists were clenched, and she was practically vibrating with fury. It was a performance for the ages, a Karen meltdown of epic proportions, and I was enjoying every second of it. Marjorie, predictably, launched an immediate and all-out assault on my glowing lawn. She called an emergency HOA meeting, she consulted lawyers, she scoured the bylaws for any possible violation, any loophole, any technicality that would allow her to force me to remove my luminous monstrosity. But she found nothing. My meticulous planning, my careful adherence to the admittedly vague HOA guidelines, and my exploitation of their own ridiculous rules had paid off. There were rules about grass, yes. There were rules about landscaping, certainly. But there were no rules about glow-in-the-dark pebbles. The HOA's legal counsel, a weary-looking man named Mr. Henderson, a recurring character in my suburban battles, it seemed, was forced to admit that Marjorie had no legal grounds for complaint. He explained in excruciating detail that my decorative rock garden was perfectly permissible, that there was no restriction on luminescent materials, and that any attempt to force me to remove it would likely result in a costly and embarrassing lawsuit. The HOA meetings became increasingly farcical. Marjorie would rant and rave, demanding action, while the other members, increasingly intimidated by me and amused by me, would shuffle their feet and look at the ceiling. They'd try to come up with new rules, new regulations, but each attempt was met with a swift and decisive rebuttal from me, armed with my meticulously researched knowledge of the bylaws and a smug, knowing smile. It was like watching a chess match where one side only had pawns and the other side had a glowing, radioactive queen. While Marjorie fumed and plotted, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood embraced my glowing lawn. At first, there were the curious stares, the hesitant questions, the whispered conversations. But soon, people started to like it. Families would stroll by in the evenings, admiring the soft, ethereal glow. Kids would gather on the sidewalk, pointing and giggling, mesmerized by the luminescent pebbles. Even some of the grumpier neighbors, the ones who'd initially sided with Marjorie, started to come around. "It's different," Mr. Henderson, not the lawyer, admitted one evening, as he stood at the edge of my yard, gazing at the glowing expanse. "But I kind of like it. It's peaceful." The glowing lawn became a local attraction, a quirky landmark, a source of neighborhood pride. People would bring their out-of-town guests to see it, boasting about the crazy glowing yard on their street. It was a conversation starter, a source of amusement, and a welcome distraction from the usual monotony of suburban life. Even the dogs seemed to approve, their nightly walks now illuminated by the soft, otherworldly glow. It was a community triumph, a victory of individuality over conformity, and a testament to the power of glow-in-the-dark pebbles. And then, of course, it went viral. Someone, presumably one of the many admiring neighbors, posted a video of my glowing lawn on TikTok. It was a simple video, just a short clip of the pebbles shimmering in the darkness, set to some appropriately spacey music. But it exploded. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and a sudden influx of attention from all corners of the internet. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing it the glow-in-the-dark lawn that beat the HOA, and interviewing delighted residents and a very, very unhappy Marjorie Finkelstein. National news outlets followed, then international. The online comments were a mixture of awe, amusement, and admiration. "This is the most epic revenge story I've ever heard," one user wrote. "HOAs are the worst. This guy is a legend," declared another. "I need this in my life," a third commented. "I became a minor internet celebrity, known as the glow-in-the-dark lawn guy or the HOA Avenger. I received interview requests, offers to endorse various glow-in-the-dark products, and even a few, again politely declined, marriage proposals. Even the company that manufactured the glow-in-the-dark pebbles got in on the action. They contacted me, offering a sponsorship deal, free products, and a starring role in their new advertising campaign. My glowing lawn, once a source of neighborhood controversy, was now a national sensation, a symbol of rebellion, a testament to the power of creative pettiness, and a surprisingly effective marketing tool. I was contacted by a local TV network to do a segment on the lawn, and my petty war with Marjorie. Marjorie Finkelstein, in a final desperate attempt to regain control, called yet another emergency HOA meeting. Her goal? To pass a new rule. A retroactive rule, specifically banning luminescent landscaping materials and any other non-traditional ground cover designed to circumvent the spirit of the HOA guidelines. But this time, it was different. The neighborhood, once cowed by her authority, had found its voice. Inspired by my glowing rebellion and fueled by the sheer absurdity of Marjorie's obsession, they turned against her. The meeting, which Marjorie had envisioned as a triumphant return to power, became her final humiliation. Her proposed rule change was met with open mockery, laughter, and a resounding no vote. The residents of Oak Bay Estates, it turned out, were quite fond of their glowing lawns, their quirky landmark, and their newfound freedom from HOA tyranny. They were not about to let Marjorie take that away from them. The tide had turned. The queen had been dethroned. And her reign of beige was over. My glowing lawn, once an anomaly, a solitary beacon of rebellion, became the catalyst for a neighborhood-wide transformation. Inspired by my example, other residents of Oak Bay Estates started embracing the glow. Mr. Henderson, freed from his grass-related anxieties, installed a glowing pathway leading to his front door. Mrs. Gable, her petunias now illuminated by a soft blue light, declared it much more aesthetically pleasing than her previous non-glowing landscaping. Even some of the more conservative neighbors, the ones who'd initially sided with Marjorie, started experimenting with glow-in-the-dark accents, adding a touch of luminescent magic to their flower beds and walkways. And then, the ultimate betrayal, for Marjorie at least. The house directly across the street from her, newly vacant after its previous owners had, coincidentally, moved to a less restrictive community, was purchased by a young couple, clearly inspired by my example. Within weeks, their front yard was also glowing, a vibrant, pulsating testament to the infectious power of petty revenge. It was the final nail in Marjorie's coffin, the ultimate symbol of her defeat. Her own next-door neighbor had joined the glowing revolution. The icing on the cake, the cherry on top of my glowing sundae of victory, came in the form of an unexpected award. The city of Alexandria, recognizing the environmental benefits of my alternative landscaping, presented me with a Water Conservation Award. It turned out that replacing my water-guzzling lawn with drought-resistant pebbles had significantly reduced my water consumption, making me a model of environmental responsibility. The irony, of course, was delicious. Marjorie, in her obsessive quest for a perfectly green lawn, had been advocating for the opposite of water conservation. My radioactive wasteland, as she'd called it, was actually a shining example of sustainable landscaping. The award ceremony was a small, local affair, but it was covered by the local newspaper, complete with a photo of me standing proudly in front of my glowing lawn, holding a certificate and grinning like a madman. I framed the article and hung it in my living room, a constant reminder of my triumph over HOA tyranny. The final act of the drama played out, as many suburban dramas do, with a moving truck. Marjorie Finkelstein, defeated, humiliated, and utterly unable to cope with the glowing revolution she'd inadvertently sparked, put her house up for sale and moved away. I watched from my window as the movers loaded her belongings into the truck. Her perfectly organized furniture, her beige-toned accessories, her collection of inspirational wall art. It was the end of an era, the final definitive victory. The queen of the HOA had been dethroned, her reign of terror over, her legacy reduced to a cautionary tale whispered among the neighbors. She didn't even look my way. And so I remained, the mostly benevolent ruler of my glowing kingdom, the unlikely champion of suburban freedom. My lawn, once a source of contention, was now a symbol of victory, a testament to the power of creative defiance, and a constant source of amusement. It was a warm summer evening. I was sitting on my porch, sipping a glass of iced tea, admiring the soft, ethereal glow of my luminescent landscape. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, and bathed in the gentle, otherworldly light of a dozen glowing yards. A new neighbor, a young woman who'd just moved in down the street, strolled by. "Excuse me," she said. "I just have to ask, what's the deal with all the glowing yards around here?" I smiled. "Oh," I said, "just a little neighborhood tradition." Who knew that a slightly below-par lawn and a burning desire for revenge could lead to all this? I guess sometimes you just gotta cover your yard in glow-in-the-dark pebbles to find your peace, I thought, watching the light dance across the pebbles. I raised my glass in a silent toast. To the glowing lawns of Oak Bay Estates, may they forever shine as a beacon of hope for all those oppressed by HOA tyranny.